Hey everyone, I have a very special guest with me today, Laroux Peoples. She is a wills and estates lawyer, and today we're gonna have a very important discussion on planning for your legacy, and also when life events occur, what you can do to make it as easy as possible for your loved ones. Now, I know these topics may sound kind of morbid, but they are, of course, necessary. And if you want to make the most out of these situations and basically not worsen it for your loved ones, it's best to be prepared as possible. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. Like, I've heard so many horror stories, families being ripped apart and fighting over assets like property and even material things like jewelry, handbags. People can be so petty and spiteful during these times. So it's really important to have clear cut instructions on who gets what, who gets to make health and money decisions on your behalf if in the event you're unable to. So I'm really excited to have Laroux here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to give us a bit of background of yourself?
For sure. And thank you so much, Michelle, for having me. So I'm a wills and estates lawyer. I'm called in the province of Ontario, so I can help folks from all over. I have a remote-based practice, I think similar to you, so really able to help people in a lot of different ways using technology. And my practice is now 8 years old. I started it for some of your women entrepreneurs in the group. I started it after I had my first child, and now I have two. And I really grew a business that could work for my life as well. And I've been very grateful for the clients I've had and the type of work I've been able to do.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And clearly, like, you've seen a lot and have helped and saved a lot of people a lot of grief and I guess unnecessary stress during unfortunate times. So I want to kind of kick off our discussion on the topic of wills. So what is a will and who needs one?
Right. So I get this question all the time, and sometimes couples come to me or a family comes to me and they say, "Can we have one will for the whole family?" And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So all adults over 18, the short answer is all adults should basically have this document here in Ontario. And what it does is it's giving us a bit of an order: who is going to take care of the situation when we die, and also who is going to get what. So it kind of addresses both of those things. And it's the legal document that allows the people that you want to have this happen follow it through.
Hmm. And so what happens if a person unexpectedly passes away and there is no will?
It really depends on again the circumstances in their family and who's left behind them. But it in the short answer is it's often extremely messy and very, very stressful for those that you leave if you die suddenly without a will. And that's because the government has kind of a mandate of who they say should be your beneficiaries. They also have a mandate on who should manage the estate. And oftentimes that's not probably somebody that you wanted for either, but we have to go by the legislation.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
So basically, if you don't tell, if you don't have it written in place, like in a legal document, who gets what, if you don't tell them, like I guess the government and everyone who gets what, the government will decide on your behalf.
That's
And
correct.
that's basically, and that's the last, I guess, entity you want dictating who gets what when it comes to like your personal property. Um,
Exactly. Let's
so
let's yeah, and let's take an example. I've had a situation with a common law spouse. So common law spouses have fewer rights than married spouses when you die without a will. And in this particular situation, the person didn't have much, but they had a car. They had a car that the family used all the time. When that person died without a will, we had no authority to go to Service Canada, even just to transfer that car over. That car had to be
wow.
left on the street for someone else to take. The person had no authority because they died without a will. It was a simple thing like that, even if they don't have big bank accounts or much to their name. This vehicle, which the whole family depended upon, unfortunately could not be properly transferred.
Oh wow. And it's a car. I can't imagine with like, having assets that are, substantially larger, like a lot of cash, a lot of money, investments, property, real estate, all those
Exactly.
things. So yeah, I can see how it can get super messy. And I'm guessing like especially when there's like, a lot of family members involved, not just like in a common law relationship, but there's going to be a lot of people digging their hands in and trying to get a piece of, whatever is left. So
For
it,
sure. And it could be like not many assets in that example or a lot, right? And
yeah.
it just depends on how people are going to fight. But you even
Mhm.
lose if you die with very few things, right? Because you haven't directed them to where they need to go.
That's right. That's so I had no idea, but that's really interesting. It's very interesting, and I'm glad you brought that up. So basically, having a will is like just having clear cut instructions on, who gets what, and what about like the decision making? Like if something ends up being unclear, or maybe it's a little bit convoluted, that's where power of attorney comes in. Am I correct?
Well, I think so. We got to think of two things. So the will is when someone dies. The powers of attorney, the person's still alive, but
Hmm.
they need help with managing their assets. They could
Yeah.
be abroad for a period of time, or they could be in hospital. And they need someone to pay their bills. But
Mhm.
the will, so if the will's unclear, let's look at the will. So if the will's wording, if you write it on a sticky note and it's not very clear what you want
Mhm.
exactly, then that's a process where your loved ones might have to hire an estate litigator, and trust me when I say their fees are 10 times what we
I can imagine.
solicitors charge,
Yeah, I
right?
can imagine.
To interpret what did the person mean? Is it that unclear? That's why going to a lawyer who's got, things, a base that they work out of that have been tested in the courts, that's the value that a lawyer brings to preparing a will, as opposed to getting it done online or writing it on a sticky note.
That's right. And you just like brought up why it's important to be proactive as opposed to being reactive because the fees can just compound and be so much more expensive and during like already what is already a difficult time. So
Exactly.
let's just say someone is still alive, they're breathing. But so what happens? Let's get into the topic of powers of attorney. What
For
is
sure.
it and like who needs to have those in place?
For sure. So we have two kinds of powers of attorney in Ontario. One is for your financial decisions, and one is purely for medical. The financial one, many of us who do this practice and who really specialize in this make you one that's active the minute you sign up. Why do we make it that way? Because those are the ones the banks prefer. And you want your bank to authorize the person you choose to
Yeah.
help you with your finances if you get stuck. By way of example, I've had a family member recently who's been hospitalized. It was a sudden situation. They've been there for 2 weeks. Their bills need to still be getting paid. They are largely a single person with their own finances. They are really, really worried, in addition to the medical issues they're facing, of how can the bills continue to be paid? Are there going to be arrears? Is there going to be interest charged? And that's because they didn't have these documents properly signed in the first place. And so now they're going through this stress on top of dealing with the health crisis of
Mhm.
how can they get this done. So when we're healthy, when we're well, when our children are going off to university, this is a key time. Believe it or not, mom or dad, you don't have the authority to help your child if they get themselves into a situation in their way at college. You don't have the authority once they're an adult. So if they appoint you as attorney for property, you can help them if they get themselves into a situation and they need your help dealing with bill payments or tuition issues. So
Mhm.
it's really important. Actually, we launch campaigns sometimes of our young people going off and having them. Basically, adults and beyond, everybody needs to have powers of attorney for sure, for
Mhm.
medical and for financial.
And what happens if like there's none in place? Are there like default like people that can make those decisions? Is it enough where it's like, let's just say I'm talking to my partner and I go, yeah, if I end up being, in a hospital and I can't make any decisions and I cannot, let's just say I'm unable to, have a good quality of life, like you can pull the plug on me. Like, is that
I
enough? Is that verbal agreement enough? Or like what happens if it's not in a written form?
So you're really at the mercy then of the hospitals, right? And are they going to look for strictly a legal document, or are they able to make the decisions themselves without input? If there's anything where they had to step into your shoes and ask for your input, such as disconnect you from life support,
Mhm.
and you are incapable of providing that, they would need the authority of a document who points to who you've
Mhm.
given authority to. So in that situation, they really, their hands would be tied. In a lot of other situations where you might be capable and around, then there might be less of an issue. But do we really want to chance that when we're in that kind of situation? And if your family has to, in fact, get the legal authority and you didn't make the document, they're looking at a guardianship application. And believe me when I say that one is 20 times the cost of what it costs making powers of attorney in
Oh,
the first
wow.
place. Right? So it's really about being smart about your money, being organized for your loved ones,
Mm,
just to avoid, it's not just the headache, but the money that you might
that's
have
right.
to, others might have to put up.
Yeah, so it's all about just being proactive and I live by the mantra of, like planned, like mitigate your risks in life, like all areas, everything else, is a bonus, right? We don't get upset with all like any of the upsides in life, right? That's a bonus, but we definitely have to plan for, the downside risks and, the what ifs, right? Like, and that's what we're most
Exactly.
fearful of, but it's also one of those it's those areas where we tend to avoid. There's no rush and we're all thinking we're healthy children, my family, everyone's healthy, so why do we have to think about these things? But we've just
Exactly.
discussed why it's so important to be proactive and um not only just to avoid a lot of confusion and potential conflict, but the cost, right? Of course, they're going to jack up the prices like after the fact because they know you're desperate, they know this needs to
That's
be
right.
sorted out, so they're
Yep.
just going to be digging into your, like, they're going to be lawyers, they're going to be digging into your pockets because they can. So
Right.
it's best to be proactive, and kind of stay ahead of life, so that it's just a lot easier when the time comes, and things need to be sorted out.
Exactly.
So what do people need the most right now? Now, I'm going to give like several scenarios,
Sure.
because I guess, depending on like a person's situation, what do they need most right now? Whether if they're single with children, a couple with no children, like couples with children, blended families. Can you just give us like a little bit more insights into what people need depending on their, I guess, status
For
and dependence?
sure. So we can say, what do they all need? Will they all need, every adult should have their own will and their
Mhm.
own two powers of attorney. So at a
Gotcha.
minimum,
Family.
that would be a requirement for everybody. And then what's in there is really some of the details. So a single person, this is a really important thing to think about if you're going to be doing this. You need to consider, is the person you're appointing to manage your estate, do they live in Ontario? Do they live in the United States?
Mm.
I have countless clients, unfortunately, where a loved one dies in Ontario. They're in the US. If you can imagine in the pandemic, the logistics of that,
Mm.
the banks have made it very, very difficult for these people to act as a state trustee. And sometimes there's tax issues, meaning that the family gets less, the beneficiaries get less, and then the US tax system is taking it. So you really have to be thinking about, where are the people that I appoint? Are they in Ontario? Are they in Canada? Or are they, in the US or abroad? So that would be kind of, especially if we're a single
Mhm.
person with or without children, I would want you to be thinking about that. Couples naturally pick each other. So
Mhm.
if you're both resident in Ontario, you're not going to have that same kind of issue.
That's right.
And then with children versus no children. So with children, are they under 18? Then we're looking at building in a trust, because I don't know about you, but getting a windfall at 18 would probably not have been appropriate for me. I really, I wasn't as savvy earlier on, more focused on school, and better by 25 and beyond, we say, for kids of today,
Mhm.
to be receiving something if a parent dies, because it could be a significant amount if it's a house in Toronto, if they're getting the proceeds of sale of a home. So we're looking at trust if you have children. If you don't have children, maybe you have furry friends, maybe you have pet children. And in
Mm-hmm.
that case, we can make a pets clause for you as well, dictating who's going to take the pets, or do you want them to be a certain clinic to take them on to adopt them? Are we giving someone a one-time gift as a thank you for
Mm-hmm.
taking on the pet? So those would be some considerations there. And then with blended families, it certainly is a little bit more complicated in a
Mm-hmm.
few situations. One is, have they each come into the relationship with children of their own, or is it just one person? If it's one person, taking the example of my family, my stepfather really raised me from a year and a half years old. So we're a blended family, but not really. He
Mm-hmm.
has no children from a prior relationship. So we're almost like a unit, really. And there are no siblings. So it's just the three of us. But in a circumstance where, say, for example, people that got together in their 50s, their kids were in university, they each have a set of children. At that point, practitioners typically here in Toronto, what we like to do to preserve your documents, to make them legally, to try to make them as foolproof as we can, is to have each person see their own lawyer. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
clients don't like to hear that, but what it means is they're getting the benefit of independent legal advice, because there's always going to be a little bit of a conflicting interest.
Of
We've
course.
got your current partner and we've
Mm-hmm.
got the kids from the prior relationship, and they may all get on like a house of fire.
Mm-hmm.
However, we want to make sure that we're thinking about, these different interests and what's it going to be like for your partner if they survive you in relation to those children.
Mm-hmm.
So we want people to see their own lawyer, especially if there's going to be any challenges to the will, because it means you've gotten the benefit of your own advice. Is it a little bit more expensive? It might be, because you're going to one person goes to one solicitor and one goes to the other. But we're trying to foolproof things so that, again, we talked about estate litigation, avoiding a will challenge if we can, because they're very easy to make.
Mm-hmm. And definitely, again, way more costly, court costs, and of course, like the mental stress, right? Like I've seen
Exactly.
that, I've heard so many stories, and it can just go on and drag on. And who wants that, right? Like it's just,
Exactly.
you want to be like, remembered, right? And or you're remembering a loved one, in a positive light, not like, hey, this is what happened, and it's just like this
Exactly.
fight, all these fights, conflicts, and then you become like one giant like dysfunctional family at the end of the day, and families are ripped apart. Like that's no fun, and nobody wants that, right? So it's,
Exactly.
that's why I guess, again, like just being very proactive, even if it does cost more, for a blended family to have, two separate lawyers, like it pays off at the end of the day, and it just allows for a smoother transition, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And it's about getting ahead of getting ahead of a problem or issue.
Mm-hmm.
Take the family cottage, for example. Many adult children may not be able to afford to keep it up, and they may not be interested.
That's
Maybe
right.
there's one child that really wants that. Have those conversations. They're awkward. They're not pleasant. Now we're past Thanksgiving,
Mm-hmm.
but and looking towards the end of the year, it's really important that families are transparent with each other. It's when they hide things from each other, that's where the
Mm-hmm.
estate litigation brews, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
we do things in secret and we don't consult and we don't talk about it. Then that's when children are left to interpret the whole thing
Yep.
themselves. Mom didn't love me, dad didn't love
Yep.
me, and then away we go to litigation. They like
Yeah,
this child more than me.
that's right. And who wants that, right? Like
Exactly.
it's just terrible. So yeah,
Exactly.
thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
You've provided some great advice, a lot of great insights, and just sharing very, very important information. And again, this applies for it applies to everyone, as you just heard in our discussion. So, Laroux, how can people reach out to you?
Yeah, so because we're kind of a tech forward firm, email is really the best. If you do give us a call, it takes us a few days sometimes, but email, you're usually going to get a response much, much faster.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. I will provide the links below on how you can get in touch with Laroux. So thank you so much, everyone. I'll see you guys in the next video.
Thank you, Michelle.